The bridge cracked under the jackhammer at exactly 8:02 in the morning. Diane Hollis stood beside the wreckage, clipboard in hand, a reporter filming every swing. She smiled. She had waited 3 weeks for this moment. Cal Mercer watched from the porch, coffee in hand, saying nothing. She turned and asked why he wasn't stopping her. He said only one word: watching. 26 minutes later, a county truck would arrive, and everything Diane had signed would become evidence. My name is Cal Mercer. I'm 49 years old, a woodworker, a small contractor, recently divorced. When my marriage ended 18 months ago, I moved back into my grandfather's house on the edge of Mapleview Estates. 2 acres of land, a main house, and across a concrete drainage channel, my workshop, 60 feet wide, climate-controlled, filled with machines I had spent a decade collecting one piece at a time. I earn close to $120,000 a year, custom furniture, architectural woodwork, finish carpentry for contractors across the region, the kind of business that takes 12 years to build and 3 months of disruption to destroy completely. Every morning, I cross a 40-foot concrete bridge to reach my shop. Delivery trucks use it, suppliers use it. Clients walk across it before commissioning a new piece. Without that bridge, the only legal route to my workshop is a 3-mile detour around 2 other properties. Without that bridge, I don't have a business. I have an expensive shed I can't reach. My grandfather built that bridge in 1969. Every spring, a small check arrives from the county, referencing something called a maintenance contract. I always assumed it was nothing important. I cashed it. I never read the fine print. That habit nearly cost me everything. Not because of the bridge itself, because of what I didn't know about who actually owned it. And because Diane Hollis, the president of our homeowners association, believed she knew better than she did. I'm not a man who looks for conflict. I keep my lawn cut. I show up to meetings when I must. I fix what breaks quietly, without asking for credit. But I keep records. That detail matters more than anything else in this story. Because the worst thing you can do when someone comes at you hard is come back harder, immediately. I'm not patient by nature. I want to be honest about that. When something is wrong, I feel it in my shoulders, a tightness that settles in while I decide whether to speak or to wait. Most people who know me well have learned to read that silence. It doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means I'm deciding how much force the moment actually requires. People who abuse small amounts of power almost always make the same mistake. They overextend. They stop checking. They mistake silence for agreement instead of observation. And then, eventually, they do something they cannot undo. With Diane, I didn't have to wait long. She was already running toward that cliff on her own. Diane Hollis moved to Mapleview Estates 5 years ago, during the housing boom, a real estate agent, always polished, the kind of woman who reads community bylaws not for guidance, but for ammunition. She had been HOA president for 3 years by the time this started. In that time, she had fined a couple for grass measured half an inch too tall. She had warned an elderly woman for leaving Christmas lights up 4 days past the deadline. Small things. Annoying, but small. I noticed it the way you notice weather. Something that brushes past you, but doesn't demand your full attention, until the vote. Last October, Diane proposed appointing her cousin to the HOA Finance Committee. Her cousin, who happened to own the landscaping company holding every single service contract in our neighborhood. I read the proposal twice. Then I went to the meeting, and I voted no. Her candidate lost by exactly 1 vote. Mine. The next morning, Diane was at my door at 7:45, clipboard in hand. "That bridge violates our updated guidelines," she said, flat and rehearsed. "You have 30 days to remove it, or face fines of $150 a day." I asked her to show me the bylaw. She cited a clause she had pushed through 8 months earlier at a meeting attended by exactly 4 people on a sleet storm Tuesday night in January. I told her I'd look into it. She left. Less than 18 hours after losing a single vote, she had a citation already written. That told me everything. This was never about the bridge. The message was simple. I run this neighborhood. Cross me, and I'll find something. That night, I pulled out the folder where I keep my property documents. Deed, survey, my grandfather's original construction permit from 1969. And at the very back, 22 years of small checks from the county that I had cashed without ever reading past the first line. I read every word. By 9 o'clock, I knew something Diane didn't, and I understood immediately that knowing it quietly was worth far more than knowing it loudly. The next morning, I called the county's infrastructure office. The coordinator found my file in seconds. The Mercer Bridge on Willow Creek, he said. That's county flood control property. Has been since 1969. Your family holds the maintenance contract. That's what the payment covers. But the bridge itself belongs to the county. I sat with that for a moment. What happens, I asked, if someone destroys it without authorization? A pause. Longer this time. That's destruction of government property. A federal offense. We'd have no choice but to refer it. That's not up to us. I thanked him. I wrote down his name, Marcus Webb, and I did not call Diane. Instead, I drove to the county records office that afternoon and requested certified copies, the original easement filing, the current ownership record, the maintenance contract under my grandfather's name. I locked everything in the fireproof box where I keep my deed and his will. Then I sat on the back porch and thought. The easy move was obvious. Send Diane a certified letter, attach the documents, force her to back down publicly within a week. Clean, fast, over. I almost did it. But I had watched Diane operate for 3 years. She didn't retreat. She regrouped. A letter would warn her, yes, but it would also give her time to quietly drop the citation, pretend it never happened, and look for a different angle. No record, no consequence. Just Diane, briefly inconvenienced, already planning her next move. So instead, I drove to the hardware store and bought 2 weatherproof security cameras with continuous backup. I mounted one facing the bridge from the workshop side, one covering the street approach. Every inch of that bridge was now on record, synced to an off-site server every 15 minutes. Then I sent her one short email. I've reviewed the relevant documentation. I'd encourage you to do the same before taking further action. She replied 4 minutes later. My documentation is in order. The 30-day clock is running. I saved that email. The 30 days passed without removal, so Diane escalated. First, a formal certified notice. Then, an engineering report. And that report told me exactly how far she was willing to go. It was signed by Randy Kellum, Diane's brother-in-law. His business card read, General Contractor and Home Improvement Specialist. He was not a licensed structural engineer. He had never inspected a load-bearing bridge in his life. Randy visited my property on a Tuesday afternoon. According to my camera's timestamp, he spent 9 minutes on site, 6 of which he used taking photographs of himself standing on the bridge, arms crossed, posing like an advertisement. He never once examined the foundation. 2 days later, his report declared the bridge a critical structural hazard, presenting imminent risk to residents and vehicles. I printed the report. I printed the camera log beside it. Then I called a friend, a real structural engineer in the city, and asked him to look at the bridge informally, no paperwork, just his eyes on it. He spent 40 minutes inspecting the foundation, the span, the drainage walls. This bridge is fine, he said. Solid pour. Good clearance. I wouldn't change a thing. I added his assessment to the folder. I called it the Hollis log, a dated time-stamped record of every notice, every email, every visit Diane made. Each entry cross-referenced against camera footage, backed up weekly to a cloud account she had no way of knowing existed. Then I met Marcus Webb in person at a small coffee shop downtown. I brought my certified documents. He brought the county's own file on the bridge, going back 53 years. We laid both sets of papers across the table. Everything matched. line for line. County property, active maintenance contract, 22 consecutive years of payment. If someone demolished this without authorization, I asked, what happens? Marcus set down his coffee. We'd have no discretion. It triggers a mandatory referral to the federal prosecutor. And if they used a fraudulent report to justify it, that's a separate fraud charge, on top of destruction of government property. I nodded. I thanked him. Before I left, I asked one more question. If I called you the night before, something like that was about to happen, could you be there the next morning? He looked at me for a long moment. Give me 12 hours' notice, he said. I'll be there. I drove home and added his words to the log. The folder was no longer thick. It was complete. While I was building my folder, Diane was building momentum. The $150 daily fine began accumulating on day 31. I didn't pay a single one. I documented each notice, date, amount, running total, and added them all to the log without ever responding. Diane sent a follow-up letter warning that unpaid fines could result in a lien against my property. I saved that too. I didn't answer that one either. Then she went to the board. At a meeting held on a Wednesday evening, a meeting I later confirmed had been announced to residents with less than 48 hours' notice when the HOA's own bylaws required a minimum of 5 days. Diane pushed through an emergency demolition authorization. The vote passed 4-2. 2 board members who might have asked harder questions weren't even there. They told me afterward they hadn't received notice until the morning of the meeting itself. The authorization gave Diane unilateral power to hire a demolition crew on behalf of the HOA to remove what the resolution called the non-compliant and structurally hazardous bridge structure on the Mercer property. The Mercer property. That phrase appeared 3 times in her own resolution. She had put it in writing, repeatedly, that the bridge belonged to me. I let it stand, uncorrected. Meanwhile, my clients were starting to ask questions. A restaurant contractor called to confirm his cabinet delivery was still on track. I told him yes, and meant it, but the yes was getting harder to say with full confidence. The pressure was real. I won't pretend otherwise. Diane contacted 3 legitimate demolition contractors over the following 2 weeks. All 3 backed out. The first asked about environmental permits for work near a managed drainage channel. Diane told him the HOA had full authorization. He asked to see the county's sign-off. She didn't have one. He declined. The second sent an estimator who spent 20 minutes walking the bridge and the channel bank before calling his office. He told Diane the next morning that they couldn't take the job without verified ownership documents from the county. Diane called him difficult. The third never even reached a site visit. His office manager asked a single question over the phone. Is this structure on county flood control infrastructure? Diane said she didn't know what that meant. He said he'd need to check county records first. She said that wasn't necessary. He said it was. End of conversation. 3 contractors, 3 attempts, 3 refusals. Each one, without realizing it. Handing Diane an exit, she kept walking straight past. She eventually found a man named Tommy, who ran a small demolition crew out of a yard on the south side of town. 2 employees, 1 jackhammer, cash-only billing, a business philosophy built entirely around not asking questions that might slow things down. Diane hired him on a Tuesday. Demolition was scheduled for Thursday, 8 in the morning. That evening, she posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, excited to announce that the HOA will be completing long overdue safety infrastructure work on Thursday morning. This is what decisive community leadership looks like. 41 people liked it. 7 praised her responsiveness. 1, a retired school teacher named Gloria, who lived 4 houses down from me, wrote simply, "Has the county been notified?" Diane never replied to her. I screenshotted the entire thread at 11:14 that night and added it to the log. Then I called Marcus Webb. "Someone's planning to demolish the Willow Creek Bridge tomorrow morning," I told him. 8 a.m. They have a crew, a fraudulent engineering report, and a board authorization signed by the HOA president. A long pause. You want me there? Come at 8:30. Let them get past the point of no return first. Another pause, longer this time. Cal. Once they start, I know what starts. That's the point, I said. He told me he'd be there. What I didn't know that night, what I only pieced together afterward, was how many people had tried to slow this down from the inside and failed. Board member Terrence Okafor had raised questions at the meeting about county jurisdiction. Diane told him legal counsel had already reviewed the matter. There was no legal counsel. She had simply emailed a paralegal a single yes or no question, gotten a vague generally yes with proper documentation, and cited that as legal clearance. Terrence asked to see it in writing. She claimed it was privileged. He voted no anyway. So did board member Patricia Sung, who told me later she had spent the night before the meeting trying, and failing, to find the county's infrastructure records online. She voted no on instinct alone. 2 no votes against 4 yes votes. Neither of them knew what I knew. They were working on procedure, pushing against a president who had already framed the whole thing as a safety emergency, who had used the word liability 11 times in a 20-minute presentation, who made anyone asking questions feel like the obstacle standing between the neighborhood and disaster. That was how Diane operated. She didn't argue with objections. She made objections feel irresponsible. It worked. Right up until the moment it didn't. There was one more person who suspected something was wrong before Thursday. Her name was Patty Sorensen. She had lived in Mapleview longer than anyone currently on the board and had served 2 terms as treasurer before Diane reorganized the committee structure in a way that quietly pushed out anyone with institutional memory. She called me the Tuesday before the demolition. Not exactly to warn me, more like she needed to say something out loud to someone who wouldn't repeat it to Diane. I looked at the board resolution, she said. The notice went out 40 hours before the meeting. Our bylaws require 5 days for any major infrastructure decision. A demolition order qualifies. I know, I said. A pause. You're not going to do anything about it, are you? It wasn't really a question. Not yet, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear a television somewhere behind her. Cal, if this goes wrong, it's already going wrong. The question, I said, is how far wrong it needs to go before it can't be quietly undone. I don't want to be involved, she said finally. I have to live here. I understand, but I'm keeping the copy of that meeting notice with the timestamp on it. That's a good idea, Patty. She hung up without saying goodbye. I added a final line to the log. Patty Sorensen, aware of quorum violation, has documented proof, unwilling to come forward proactively, will likely cooperate if formally asked. I didn't blame her. Diane had spent 3 years making an example out of anyone who pushed back publicly. Fines, procedural pressure, applied quietly until people complied or simply gave up. Most people in this neighborhood had mortgages, families, neighbors they had to face at the mailbox every morning. The cost of standing up to Diane wasn't abstract. It was specific, and it was daily. What Patty didn't know, what I couldn't tell her yet, was that by Thursday morning, standing up to Diane wasn't going to be necessary. Diane was going to do it herself. Wednesday night, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, from running the sequence forward, again and again, looking for the place where it might break. Before I commit a piece of lumber to a cut, I measure it 3 times in my head. Wood doesn't give you a second chance once the blade comes down. This was the same principle. Bigger stakes. The sequence, as I had it. Tommy's crew arrives at 8. Demolition begins. Marcus arrives at 8:30. By then, there's active destruction underway. Concrete broken, infrastructure visibly damaged, Diane on record as the authorizing party. Marcus presents the ownership documents. The demolition stops. The county refers the matter. Everything Diane signed, said, and posted becomes part of a federal record she can never revise. Clean, logical. But I kept snagging on one thing. What if Tommy asked for permits at the last minute? What if Diane, overnight, suddenly called the county to check? Any one of those, and the sequence collapsed. Not permanently. The ownership was still real, the report still fraudulent, the violation still documented. But without active demolition underway when Marcus arrived, the federal charge evaporated. What remained was only a civil dispute. Fines, arguments, months of process, and Diane walking away with nothing worse than a reprimand. For a woman who had spent 3 years treating this neighborhood like her personal territory, that wasn't enough. So at 11 that night, I did the one thing I could still control. I confirmed the restaurant contractor's delivery date. I verified my line of credit was accessible. Then I walked the bridge one more time in the dark, checked that both cameras were recording, and stood there listening to the channel run beneath my feet. Solid concrete. 53 years old. Not going anywhere, unless Tommy showed up on time. I went to bed at midnight, set my alarm for 6:30, and lay there thinking about my grandfather, pouring concrete by hand in the August heat of 1969, simply because something needed doing, and he was the one to do it. He built it right. I was counting on that. Thursday morning, 6:47. I was on the back porch with coffee when Tommy's truck pulled up. A white flatbed with a hydraulic liftgate and a compressor strapped down with ratchet straps that had seen better years. Tommy climbed out first, mid-50s, work boots, a Carhartt jacket with a torn pocket, the bearing of a man who had spent decades testing structural limits professionally and occasionally personally. His 2-man crew followed, unloading the jackhammer, the generator, a sledge, and a wheelbarrow without exchanging a word. The efficiency of people who'd done this so many times, the steps no longer required discussion. Diane arrived at 7:50. Her white SUV pulled in behind Tommy's truck. She stepped out in a pressed blazer, dark slacks, oversized sunglasses pushed up over her hair, clipboard under one arm, coffee in hand. She spoke briefly with Tommy, nodded twice, made a note. A young reporter arrived at 7:58, canvas bag over her shoulder, phone already out. Diane greeted her warmly. I watched from across the yard as Diane gestured toward the bridge, toward my workshop, the reporter nodding and typing. At 8:02, Tommy fired the jackhammer. I stood where I was and watched. The first strikes hit the near approach, the county's end, closest to the street. Concrete cracked in gray lines, then chunks broke loose and dropped into the channel below. The sound was enormous, bouncing off the workshop wall, flattened and industrial, the specific sound of something being permanently undone. Diane stood beside the destruction, with the stillness of someone enjoying a view. Every few minutes, she turned to the reporter and delivered another line. I couldn't hear the words over the jackhammer, but I could read the energy. Community safety, decisive leadership, long overdue. At 8:17, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Leaving now, there in 12. I looked at the bridge. Tommy's crew had broken through 8 feet of the 40-foot span. Concrete debris in the channel. Rebar exposed and bent outward. Active demolition of county infrastructure, documented on 2 cameras, witnessed by a reporter, authorized in writing by the president of the Homeowners Association. I typed back, "Take your time. Come in from the street." Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 weeks. I opened the log on my phone and added a line. Thursday, 8:19 a.m. demolition underway. Infrastructure visibly compromised. Reporter on site. Diane Hollis present and directing. Crew operating without permits. Marcus Webb en route. Then one more line. Folder complete. At 8:23, Diane walked across the yard toward me. I hadn't moved from my spot. Same coffee, same position. She stopped about 6 feet away and looked at me the way people look when they're deciding whether what they're about to say is a warning or a victory lap. She chose victory lap. "You know," she said, "you could have avoided all of this." "Could have," I said. 30 days. That's all you needed. 30 days. And this whole thing goes away quietly. She glanced back at the bridge, at Tommy's crew, at the reporter still filming. Instead, you made it into a whole production. I didn't invite the reporter, I said. She smiled. The wrong kind of smile, the one that means I've already won, and we both know it. I want you to understand something, Cal. This isn't personal. This is about maintaining standards that protect everyone in this community, including you. I appreciate that. The fines will stop once the structure is removed. The board's already agreed to waive the balance as a goodwill gesture. We're not unreasonable people. I nodded slowly. That's generous. She studied me, looking, I think, for anger or distress, some sign that this was landing the way she'd intended. I gave her none of it. I just stood there with my coffee, my expression as neutral as I could manage. You're not going to say anything, are you? Not right now, I said.
Something flickered across her face, not quite doubt, but adjacent to it, gone in a second. She straightened, recapped her pen, and turned back toward the bridge. "Suit yourself," she said, and walked away. I watched her rejoin the reporter, watched the gap in the bridge widen from 8 feet to 12, rebar jutting upward, gray dust settling on the channel walls. And here is the honest part, the part I don't enjoy admitting, but need to say clearly. Standing there, watching it happen, knowing everything I knew, there was a moment where the weight of it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Not doubt, not guilt, something closer to grief. That bridge was 53 years old. My grandfather built it with his own hands. I had crossed it every working day for the better part of a decade, and even though I knew it would be rebuilt, even though Marcus had confirmed county protocol required full restoration, watching that concrete get sledgehammered into a drainage ditch while Diane stood 20 feet away taking notes on her clipboard, that wasn't a small thing. It cost something. I want to be honest about that. But then Diane laughed at something the reporter said, bright, easy, the laugh of someone who has just finished winning, and the grief went somewhere quieter, and the patience came back instead. My phone buzzed. I'm parked on the street, walking in now. Sometimes the most expensive part of winning clean is what you have to stand there and watch happen first. Here's why I couldn't let this end with a letter in week 1. It wasn't the bridge. It wasn't even the $68,000 in active contracts riding on it, though that pressure was real. It was something quieter, and I've had time since to understand it clearly. My grandfather bought this land in 1961. He worked a machine shop for 30 years, early shifts, overtime, the kind of work that leaves calluses in specific places, and a particular relationship with time, effort, and what things are actually worth. He saved for 11 years to buy these 2 acres. He built the main house himself, over 2 summers. He built the bridge in 1969 because he needed to reach the back half of his land, and that was simply what the situation required. He left me this property with one written instruction: take care of it. 3 words, no elaboration. He wasn't a man who elaborated. I moved back into that house 18 months ago with almost nothing. Marriage gone, half my savings in a settlement, the particular loneliness of a man in his late 40s starting over in the house where he'd spent his childhood summers. The shop was the one thing I had built entirely myself. 12 years of early mornings, late nights, clients earned 1 referral at a time. The one thing in my life that was unambiguously mine, unambiguously intact. Diane wasn't just threatening a bridge, she was threatening the last solid thing I had, and doing it casually, as a side effect of a grudge over a committee vote, with a fraudulent report and a cash-only crew on a Thursday morning, like it was an errand, like what I'd built didn't deserve a second thought. That's what made waiting worth it. Not revenge, not drama, just the absolute necessity of making sure that when this ended, it ended in a way that couldn't be quietly revised later. No reprimand, no apology letter, no Diane Hollis briefly inconvenienced back at the next meeting with a new clipboard and a new target. Done completely, permanently. My grandfather built things to last. I intended to honor that. Marcus Webb walked through the side gate at 8:31, county badge on his belt, clipboard in hand, the unhurried stride of a man who has delivered difficult news to stubborn people enough times that it no longer requires preparation, just presence. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, the kind of calm that doesn't perform itself. He took in the scene in about 4 seconds: the jackhammer, the broken surface, the debris, Diane standing at the edge of the demolition zone with her reporter, Tommy's crew working through what was now a 15-foot gap in the span. He walked straight toward the site. "I need to speak with whoever authorized this work." Diane turned, looked him over once, didn't recognize him, which meant she had never once called the county to check. "I'm the HOA president. This is an approved safety demolition." Marcus unfolded a single large sheet, blue ink on white, stamped with the county's infrastructure seal, dated 1969. He held it so she could see it clearly. "Ma'am, you're demolishing government property. This bridge has belonged to the county since 1969. Tommy cut the jackhammer mid-swing. The silence that followed was immediate and total. The particular silence that comes after something very loud suddenly stops. Diane's expression moved through several phases in about 4 seconds. Confusion first, then the recalculation of someone whose certainty has just developed a crack, then something harder, the instinct to push back. "That's impossible. I have documentation showing this structure is on private property." "You have a report," Marcus said, "signed by someone without a structural engineering license, authorizing demolition of infrastructure you don't own. I have the original easement filing, the current ownership record, and 22 years of maintenance payments made to the Mercer family for upkeep of this exact structure." He set the survey down on what remained of the railing. "This is not a dispute. This is public record." The reporter had stopped typing. She was filming now, phone raised, slowly rotating to take in Diane, Marcus, the broken bridge, the debris below. Tommy pulled his crew back without being asked, walked halfway to his truck, then turned. "Lady, you told me this was private property. I want my cash right now, and then I have never met you in my life." Diane opened her mouth, closed it. That's when I walked over. I set my coffee on what remained of the railing, beside Marcus's survey, and laid down the folder I'd carried for 3 weeks, the log, the county documents, Randy's report beside the camera timestamps, the board resolution with its 3 references to the Mercer property, the email trail, the screenshot of Gloria's ignored question, Patty's quorum notes, my friend's engineer assessment, 22 years of maintenance checks. Everything in order, everything dated. "Diane," I said, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Webb. He's been maintaining this bridge since before either of us moved here." She turned and looked at me the way people look when they realize they've been the last to know something everyone else understood weeks ago. The sunglasses were still on. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could see everything else. The set of her jaw, the stillness of her hands, the clipboard dropping from its authoritative angle to something closer to her side. "You knew," she said, 3 weeks ago. "You let me—" She stopped herself. "I sent you an email," I said. "I told you to review the relevant documentation before taking further action. You replied 4 minutes later and told me your documentation was in order." I opened the folder and placed the printed email on top of the survey. Your words, your timestamp, your name in the sender field, that's in here too. She looked at the folder, then at Marcus, then at the reporter, who hadn't stopped filming. I kept my voice level. "You authorized this. You signed the resolution. You hired the crew. You invited the press." I set the resolution down beside the email, beside the survey. "I just didn't stop you." Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm required to document what's happened here and refer this to the prosecutor's office. Destruction of government infrastructure isn't discretionary on our end. I'd also note this report was signed by someone without a license, which creates separate exposure for fraud." He looked at her steadily. "I'd recommend you contact an attorney before saying anything further." The reporter lowered her phone. For the first time since arriving, she looked uncertain about what story she was actually covering. Diane said nothing for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the pressed blazer quality entirely. "I was acting in the interest of community safety. With a cash-only demolition crew," I said, "operating without county permits, on infrastructure you described 3 times in writing as private property." I placed Randy's report on the railing, then the camera log showing his 9-minute site visit, then the timestamp comparison. He had spent 6 of those 9 minutes photographing himself. He never once looked at the foundation. My cameras had the entire visit on record. Diane stared at the growing stack of documents, the survey, the email, the resolution, the report, the timestamps, every piece dated, every piece carrying her name, her signature, her authorization. The whole structure she had built, laid out in front of her. "You planned this," she said. "No," I said. "You planned this. I just kept records." Marcus collected his survey and began filling out his incident report. Tommy's crew loaded the jackhammer back onto the flatbed in silence. The reporter put her phone away and stood very still, as if trying to decide whether to stay or leave, and couldn't commit to either. I picked up my coffee and looked at the gap in the bridge. 15 feet of broken concrete, rebar exposed, my grandfather's pour visible in cross-section along the break line. Solid aggregate, clean mix, 53 years old, and still exactly what it had always been, county property, and always had been. Justice doesn't always arrive as a punch. Sometimes it arrives as a folder, placed quietly on a railing, in exactly the right order. The county referred the case to federal prosecutors that same afternoon. Diane and Randy both faced charges: destruction of government property, fraudulent engineering documentation, filing false reports with a municipal body. The HOA's insurance carrier denied coverage entirely, since the demolition had never received county approval. The board held an emergency session 4 days later and voted to remove Diane from the presidency, 6-1. At the federal hearing 8 months later, the judge sentenced her to 18 months probation and ordered restitution to the county for bridge reconstruction and environmental remediation of the channel. She was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners board again. Randy's contractor license was suspended pending a separate fraud investigation. Diane's real estate license was placed on administrative hold. All of the accumulated fines against me, over $1,600, were voided by the new board in their very first session. Gloria, the retired schoolteacher who had asked the one unanswered question on Facebook, was elected the new HOA president by a margin that wasn't close. The new bridge was completed 4 months after the sentencing, wider than the original, with modern safety railings and soft lighting along the approach for evening crossings. The county installed a small steel marker on the near post, clean black lettering on brushed metal, reading simply, "County Flood Control Infrastructure, Rebuilt." The neighborhood held a small ceremony on a Saturday morning. Gloria brought lemonade. Terrence came. Patty Sorensen stood near the back, caught my eye once, and nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. My friend from the city showed up uninvited, looked at the new span for about 30 seconds and said, "Good pour." Then he left. I cross that bridge every morning on my way to the shop now. The lights come on automatically at dusk. I can see them from the kitchen window while I'm cleaning up after dinner, a pale, steady line in the dark, marking the path between the house and the work. Some mornings I stop at the midpoint and just stand there, feeling the concrete beneath my boots, listening to the channel run below. I think about my grandfather, building this thing by hand in the August heat of 1969, simply because something needed doing, and he was the one to do it. He built it right. He built it to last. He just never could have known it would outlast a fraudulent report, a cash-only demolition crew, and one HOA president who confused the absence of immediate resistance with the absence of consequence. I still get that small annual check from the county every spring. I read every word of it now. The most effective traps are the ones you never have to build. You only have to know they're already there, and have the patience to let someone else walk all the way into them. This story was never really about a bridge. It was about what happens when someone confuses a little authority with actual ownership. People like Diane rarely set out to break the law. They take one small step that goes unchallenged, then another, until the line between enforcing the rules and controlling the people around them simply disappears. And the silence of everyone nearby, the neighbors who stay quiet to keep the peace, the people who decide it isn't worth the fight, that silence gets read as permission. Quiet is not the same as empty. Patience is not the same as weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay completely still and let the truth build its own case. It doesn't expire, it only waits.